Hello, everyone, and welcome to this February 27th edition of Property Perspective. Today, I have the pleasure to be with Matthieu Arseneau. Hi, Matthieu.
Hi, Simon.
And with Andrée Desrosiers.
Hello, Simon.
Welcome, Andrée. Our topic of the day, renting or buying. But before we try to answer that rather complex question, let's discuss with Matthieu about recent economic news that influence the real estate market. So Matthieu, in its January press release, the Bank of Canada suddenly removed the sentence that it remains ready to raise the policy rate if necessary. Does this first step mean that the reduction in interest rate is coming pretty soon?
In fact, I'll say that it was a bit surprising, and we discussed about it, that in December they were still guiding for potential rate hikes at that moment, while the Federal Reserve was going in the opposite direction. But yes, that's the first step before seeing those rate cuts that we all expect. And when we look at the data or for inflation data, which are crucial at this point for the decision of the Bank of Canada, we can see that December there has been a reacceleration on inflation, but January provided optimism in this fight against inflation, with headline at 2.9% year over year, which is down back to its the target range of the Bank of Canada. So that was great news, showing that monetary policy transmission works. It's cooling the economy and cooling inflation. And when we look at the breakdowns, that's surprising to see that when you exclude shelter component, in fact, we are now at 1.5% in year-over-year inflation, so below the 2% target. It will be difficult for the shelter component to come down, given that it's pushed higher with mortgage interest costs increasing with higher rates, and rent prices being driven by the housing scarcity that we're experiencing with strong demographic growth. So that's the trick. But clearly, this development, when we see what is going on with the ex-shelter CPI, that's good news, and at some point it gives an opportunity for the Bank of Canada, in our view, to decline first rate cuts in June.
Finally, Matthieu, still according to its communication, the central bank showed we can say a certain discomfort with salary trends that were still too high, according to them. As the labor market continues to relax, is it only a matter of time before we see wages moderate?
In fact, and that's what the Bank of Canada is a bit worried about, what is going on with the labor market, with wage pressure. So that's something they want to see to slow in the next few months. When we look at employment data over the past few months, at first you can say, oh, in January, 37,000 jobs created. It looks strong. On an historical basis, a good report was like 20,000 when we look at the 5 years prior to the pandemic. But we have to keep in mind that we have very, very strong population growth at this point. In fact, in January, we got the highest increase on record at 125,000 in a month in Canada for population age 15 plus. Usually, to maintain the employment rate, so the percentage of the population at work, we needed 80,000 jobs created. So 37,000 in this context is weak, and it was all part-time jobs, public sector. It shows that the private sector is not that strong and not hiring enough to absorb this increase in population at this point. So for that reason, yes, we see the economy is calming, the labor market has calmed a bit, and ultimately it should lead to a moderate increase, moderation in wages at some point this year. Especially that when we look at labor shortages, we are close to only 25% of corporations saying that they are experiencing that situation compared to above 45% a couple of quarters ago. And why there seems to be no labor shortage anymore, we are currently seeing an increased proportion of corporations seeing their sales declining. So 40%, we only saw that proportion in the last few recessions. So we have to keep that in mind. The economy is slowing, inflation is slowing. That opens the door for rate cuts in our view in June.
Interesting, Matthieu. With anticipation of a policy rate cut, mortgage rates have fallen, and the housing market appears to be recovering as it enters peak season. What's on your radar, Matthieu, for the next few months?
In fact, we as you see, we are a bit pessimistic or prudent for the whole economy. But given the decline in rates that you just mentioned, given the strong demographic, we are already seeing a rebound of housing sales despite this relatively weak labor market. So home prices are still declining given the affordability issues that we are currently seeing, but activity is bouncing back, and perhaps we're going to see a rebound in home prices, a slight rebound in the next few months given this rebound in activity. So that's our forecast at this moment. So we are in a very atypical situation, slowing economy, but housing sector could remain resilient in such a context because this demographic boom. We have to keep in mind that population growth was 250,000 over the past year. Usually, we have one housing starts for an increase of 1.7 in the population. So that means that we should have, if just to absorb this kind of population growth, housing starts should have been at above 700,000 while it was at 240,000. So it's not enough. So there's shortages in the housing sector. So that's pushing home prices, or it looks that it leads to a resilience in home prices and increase in rent prices at this point. So a very atypical situation at this point.
Hey, thank you very much, Matthieu, for your excellent comments.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you. On your side, Andrée, we are at a time of year when many tenants receive their lease renewal and ask themselves the question of whether they continue to be tenants or if they should become owners. Can you tell us a little more about this eternal questioning?
With great pleasure, Simon. Becoming an owner has always been valued over renting, and acquiring a property is a dream for many Canadians. But is becoming an owner always more advantageous than being a tenant? The answer is not so simple, because many comparison criteria must be taken in account. Investing in brick and mortar, as they say, always seems like a safe investment, but also involves a larger budget. Renting is generally considered more flexible, but can also be perceived as a loss-making investment. It's not easy to decide.
You're absolutely right, Andrée. Can you give us some food for thought to help us see things more clearly?
I'll try. I'll give you some pros and cons of each choice. Let's begin with the advantages of being an owner. Purchasing a property is generally, and I say generally, considered a long-term investment and a way to build wealth, something to reassure yourself in a context of inflation. An owner is also free to invest in his home and do work there. He therefore has the freedom to personalize his home without having to ask anyone permission. While improving his comfort, he also, in the long term, can gain a nice added value when he sells its property. Fixed mortgage payments for the duration of the term may also provide some long-term financial stability because they are not subject to inflation, because they are fixed for the entire term, which is mainly, 3 to 5 years. So that protects you from inflation. On the other hand, access to property requires a substantial budget. In fact, as we discussed in previous edition, over and above the down payment, that is a minimum of 5% of the purchase value of your property, several other costs must be taken into account. Appraisal, inspection, legal fees, mortgage insurance premium if required, transfer tax, moving expenses. So there's a big number of initial fees that you have to face when you become an owner. Over and above this one-time, fees, you've got the recurrent one, as we say, the one that comes every year. So you must pay your municipal and school taxes. You must do your maintenance on your property. You may have to do some repairs and other things like that. There are also certain risks which we don't think always of, like the neighborhood where we choose to be. Is it the development, is it going good or it's poorly managed? Do you have problems with your neighbor? We don't want that, but sometimes it happens. So that's elements that can mean that you will resale at a loss because you want to leave this neighborhood. So the choice of the location of the house is therefore essential as well. That's on the owner side. Let's take a look at the rental side. On the advantage of being a tenant, the main one is really the great freedom that rental confers. In general, living in an apartment is quick and easy. And a person likely to move regularly due to career move or things like that, should favor rental. Apart from the obligation to pay the rent each month, a tenant has fewer financial obligation in comparison with the homeowner. Taxes are paid by the homeowner and the cost of home insurance is usually lower than the one of an owner. The money also that you use to purchase a house can be invested elsewhere, providing greater financial liquidity. On the other side, the lease provides that the amount of rent will be revised yearly. In the current inflation context, these increases can be quite significant in certain cases. As Matthieu mentioned earlier, there's also the market is really tight on the rental part. So to find another apartment can be quite difficult in most of the larger cities in Canada. As well, a tenant cannot carry out work in his apartment. Okay, he has to depend on the owner both for maintenance and for improving its comfort. So as you can see, Simon, there is no simple answer.
Andrée, in light of what you just have said, what are the basic questions that we must answer to discover what's best for us?
Yeah, there are some, that you can ask yourself, and I will give you some of them, Simon. First, are you financially stable? Okay. Does your budget allows you to absorb unforeseen events? Because like we said earlier, you can have repair, you can have maintenance fees. So being an owner, you need to have a budget that is that has more room for these type of event. What about your employment situation? Are you looking for a new job? Is this new job that you will get will be in another neighborhood or even in another city? So that's a question that you have to ask yourself. Are you ready to spend time maintaining this house? That's a question to ask yourself. And your family situation, will it change during the coming years, the coming month? Are you going to have children or things like that? So that's all things that you have to consider. And are there expenses as well that you are absolutely not ready to let go of? Like, travel, expensive cars, good restaurants. So that's all. That's simple questions, but you have to ask them before making your decision to see which one fits you the most. We also have an excellent tool at the bank, which is called Should You Rent or Buy? And I encourage you to everyone that is asking this question to go and fill it out, and it's on our website. So at the end of the day, Simon, the decision of staying tenant or being an owner it depends on each person's situation, but also on their short and long-term objectives. So as I always say, go and discuss all of this with your banking advisor in order to obtain personalized advice based on your particular situation.
Thank you, Andrée, for your very pertinent suggestions. I hope you all enjoy today's program, and we'll see you very soon for your next edition of Property Perspective. Thank you.